The cameras cut in. Silence. Then came the blow. "Keir Starmer," Trump snarled, venom dripping from every syllable. The phrase reverberated around the globe, and just like that, a whisper became a roar. What unfolded next was no ordinary political skirmish. It was an unfiltered, explosive rejection aired live, and its reverberations are rattling Britain's corridors of power. It all began as another seemingly routine press conference in sunny Florida. Trump stood before a sea of expectant reporters, questions flying about US politics, global tensions, and eventually, Britain's next election. Then someone dared ask about Keir Starmer's recent words, about resetting ties with the US if he became Prime Minister. Trump paused, his jaw clenched. And in that pregnant silence, you knew this was no ordinary jab. This was a direct strike. "Keir Starmer," he began, each word deliberate, harsh. "Never heard of a weaker leader in my life." The room chunked, disbelief hanging in the air. Microphones perched forward hungrily. Cameras captured the crescendo of every gasp, every flinch, every stunned blink across the audience. Trump didn't hold back. He unleashed a torrent. Starmer was soft, too soft on Brexit, digging up immigration rhetoric, trashing his impartial stance on law and order. He wants to undo everything we fought for. Soft on crime, soft on borders, soft on everything. His voice cut through the murmurs, hotter than a Florida noon. Live television turned into a global spotlight. Audiences in London, Edinburgh, Manchester, freezing mid-scroll, mouths agape. But the most scathing line, the Puppet for Brussels label. One phrase, and he laid waste to Starmer's reputation in real time. No filters, no warnings. Just raw contempt beamed across Atlantic airwaves. Within seconds, social media ignited. Pro-Brexit voices cheered. Labour supporters scrambled to salvage the narrative. And Starmer's team, utter radio silence. That hesitation in the face of such a public blast sent its own message. They were unprepared, rattled, vulnerable. The moment Trump's words hit the airwaves, Westminster erupted into chaos. Keir Starmer's Labour Party, already on uncertain footing due to internal cracks and mounting public scepticism, found itself spiralling. Within hours, political advisers and MPs were seen huddled in urgent meetings behind closed doors. Phones rang endlessly, emails flooded inboxes. Starmer's communications team scrambled to draft a response, but by then the damage had been done. Britain had just witnessed its potential future Prime Minister humiliated on the world stage, and worse still, by a former US president whose influence still echoed loudly across conservative and working-class voters alike. Behind the scenes, a storm brewed. Centrist Labour MPs reportedly demanded immediate clarification on Starmer's foreign policy direction. Why was he even mentioned by Trump? One senior MP was overheard asking, frustration tinged with fear. Whispers of betrayal ran rampant. There was no escaping the fact that Trump's words were not just a personal insult, they were a brutal referendum on Starmer's leadership and international standing. The Conservatives, naturally, pounced. Tory strategists began circulating edited clips of the broadcast across social media, painting Starmer as weak, untrustworthy, and already discredited by the world's toughest political players. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage took to GB News with fire in his eyes. "This is what I've been warning about," he said. Starmer is viewed as a joke globally. His words fed the flames, fueling the growing narrative that Labour's leader lacked backbone and global respect. Reform UK quickly followed suit, with Richard Tice declaring it a national embarrassment that a man with such a fragile image could even be considered for Prime Minister. The momentum, once cautiously shifting in Labour's favour due to Conservative blunders, now seemed to be lurching toward an irreversible reversal. Polls that had shown Labour inching ahead began to tighten. Overnight surveys revealed a sharp dip in voter confidence regarding Starmer's ability to stand up to international powers. Conservative-leaning outlets wasted no time exploiting the scandal. Tabloid headlines screamed betrayal. Front pages blasted, "Trump snubs Starmer, UK humiliated," and special relationship shattered before it began. Suddenly, Starmer's campaign slogan about restoring respect rang hollow. How could he promise global cooperation when the most notorious world leader alive just obliterated him publicly? Even Labour insiders began admitting, off record, that Starmer had walked into a trap. His previous comments implying a potential pivot toward EU-aligned diplomacy had not gone unnoticed by US Republicans or Brexit hardliners. Trump's team, reportedly briefed on Starmer's stance before the presser, knew exactly how to light the fuse. And the timing wasn't random either. On the brink of a major NATO summit, and with the UK election clock ticking fast, the message was clear. Starmer could not be trusted with global leadership. Compounding the crisis, Starmer's allies made matters worse. David Lammy, Labour's shadow foreign secretary, attempted damage control but only succeeded in stirring more doubt. In a televised interview, he hesitated when asked if Labour still viewed the US as Britain's closest ally. "We value many relationships," he said, eyes darting nervously. The backlash was instant. Commentators accused Labour of preparing to shift Britain's loyalties away from Washington and toward Brussels and Berlin. Such optics were politically poisonous, especially in red wall seats, where patriotism and sovereignty remain potent forces. Amid the turmoil, Conservative leader Rishi Sunak wasted no time leveraging the chaos. In a primetime address, he took a calm but firm tone, saying, "This nation needs strong leadership, leaders who command global respect and who are trusted on the world stage. That is not what we saw today from Labour." The message resonated. It wasn't just a political jab, it was a calculated blow aimed directly at wavering voters who had lost faith in the Tories but still felt unsure about Starmer's mettle. In the corridors of Whitehall, whispers grew louder that foreign diplomats had taken note of the debacle. Reports suggested that officials from several European nations expressed quiet concern about Labour's international coherence. Would Starmer appease the EU or stand firm with NATO? Would he be assertive or deferential on immigration? Would he honour Britain's defence commitments or try to reshape them? Questions that were once hypothetical now felt urgent and deeply consequential. And all of it, every bit of chaos, had been sparked by a 90-second tirade from Donald Trump. Just a few unscripted sentences, spoken with venom and precision, had upended Labour's delicate balancing act. Starmer's effort to appear strong, measured, and globally responsible was now overshadowed by a single brutal perception: weakness. And in the eyes of millions, perception often becomes reality. By the end of the day, Labour HQ looked less like a campaign war room and more like a damage control bunker. Staffers reportedly worked through the night, coordinating with international advisors, frantically reworking Starmer's upcoming speeches, and debating whether to confront Trump directly or attempt to shift the narrative elsewhere. But whichever path they chose, one fact remained clear. Keir Starmer had been called out by one of the most influential voices in global politics, and the entire country had watched it unfold in real time. As the dust from Trump's bombshell began to settle, a far more dangerous ripple effect began taking shape within the Labour Party itself. What started as external humiliation soon turned inward, cracking the fragile unity Starmer had struggled to build since taking the leadership. The party that once stood on the edge of electoral resurgence now found itself fighting fires on all fronts. The inner circle fractured into warring camps. Centrist MPs began voicing fears that Starmer's reputation was now irreparably damaged on the international stage, while left-wing members accused the leadership of betraying Labour's working-class roots by allowing foreign voices like Trump's to dominate their narrative. The pressure cooker of internal dissent exploded when a prominent backbencher, long frustrated by Starmer's cautious leadership style, took to X, formerly Twitter, to declare that Labour must rethink its foreign policy stance before it becomes an international laughingstock. Within hours, hashtags like #StarmerWeek and #TrumpExposes Labour began trending across social media platforms, hijacked by political opponents and disillusioned Labour supporters alike. The optics were dire. Labour's once confident digital campaign machine was now forced into reactive mode, pushing out defensive content while trying to calm panic among the grassroots. Adding to the crisis was the rise in defections, or at least the threat of them. Senior insiders leaked to friendly outlets that several Labour MPs were in quiet talks with independents and even members of Reform UK, not necessarily to jump ship, but to explore alternatives if Starmer continued on his current trajectory. One particularly damning report suggested that certain Midlands constituencies, critical swing regions, had seen local party members resign en masse in protest of Starmer's leadership and foreign policy ambiguity. Some even joined Farage's reform movement, claiming they wanted a leader who wouldn't get laughed at by global heavyweights. This wasn't just political drama, it was existential. The very soul of the Labour Party was being called into question. Could it still represent working-class Britons, Brexiteers, centrists, and soft-left urban progressives all at once? Or had Starmer, in trying to appeal to everyone, now appealed to no one? His effort to walk the tightrope between internationalist diplomacy and British nationalism had failed spectacularly, and all it took was one verbal missile from Donald Trump to send that balancing act crashing down. Compounding the internal carnage, was the re-emergence of Labour's older wounds, specifically the question of trust. The party had spent years trying to rebuild its image after the Corbyn era, promising stability, unity and seriousness. But now even party loyalists were quietly admitting that voters might not buy it anymore. "We spent all this time telling people Keir was competent and reliable," one anonymous campaign strategist told a political podcast. Now they're asking if he can even hold his own in a room with world leaders. While Starmer attempted to project calm in scheduled interviews, the cracks were visible. His language became increasingly vague. His tone wavered. He avoided direct references to Trump, but the spectre of the former president loomed large over every question. When asked point blank whether he felt respected by international leaders, Starmer pivoted to talking points about climate change, economic growth, and national security. But no amount of spin could erase the image now seared into the national consciousness of a man publicly rejected by a former US president, broadcast live, with no chance to respond. Meanwhile, Farage doubled down. With the media spotlight fixed firmly on Labour's implosion, the Reform UK leader seized the opportunity to stake his claim as the only political figure capable of standing up to both domestic incompetence and foreign interference. "This isn't about Trump," he declared at a packed rally in Essex. "It's about the future of our country. If the man who might become our Prime Minister can't even command respect from the world's leaders, then we need someone who can." His supporters roared in approval. And crucially, so did many undecided voters who had previously wavered between Labour and Reform. The Conservative Party, too, smelled blood in the water. Cabinet ministers released coordinated statements emphasising Britain's need for experienced, proven leadership on the global stage. Though none mentioned Starmer by name, the implication was obvious. And even Liberal Democrats, sensing a shift in public mood, began attacking Labour's credibility more openly, particularly in key marginal constituencies where every vote now counted more than ever. The once certain momentum behind Labour began to stall, then reverse. Media coverage grew even more relentless. Investigative reports unearthed past interviews in which Starmer had expressed admiration for certain EU policies that contradicted post-Brexit sovereignty. These clips resurfaced across all platforms, now interpreted through the lens of Trump's rejection. Political pundits speculated about Starmer's ability to survive the scandal, while some questioned if internal party leadership challenges might be launched before the next general election. The whispers had started, and in British politics, whispers often turn into roars with startling speed. As if that wasn't enough, Labour's foreign policy team came under direct scrutiny. Questions were raised about briefings Starmer received before his last diplomatic trip to Brussels, specifically whether warnings about how his actions might be perceived by American Republicans had been ignored. If true, it painted a picture of not just weakness, but recklessness. And for a party promising grown-up government, such allegations were politically lethal. By the close of the week, the mood within Labour was grim. Party HQ denied all reports of defections and internal panic, but the public wasn't convinced. The opposition was no longer just coming from the outside, it was bubbling from within. And with each passing hour, Starmer's silence on the Trump debacle only deepened the sense of crisis. The Labour leader had hoped to glide into number 10 on a message of competence and control. Instead, he now faced an internal rebellion, a credibility crisis, and a resurgent opposition ready to feast on the wreckage. As the days dragged on from Trump's public rejection, the situation only deteriorated further for Keir Starmer. What began as an international embarrassment quickly escalated into a full-scale political crisis engulfing Westminster. With every news cycle, the narrative slipped further out of Labour's control. Keir Starmer's silence, far from appearing measured, was increasingly viewed as cowardice, a sign that he lacked both the strength and conviction to respond decisively under pressure. The nation watched as Labour's message fractured, its MPs scrambled, and Reform UK, led by the ever-emboldened Nigel Farage, surged ahead with frightening momentum. While Starmer and his aides tried to reset the agenda with planned speeches and local visits, they were consistently drowned out by the political aftershocks of Trump's televised rejection. Every newspaper front page screamed failure. Every major broadcast featured clips of Trump's words on loop. Even foreign outlets, across Europe, in the US and Australia, ran headlines questioning Britain's opposition leadership. One Italian paper mocked Starmer as Il Fantasma del Labor, or the Ghost of Labour, noting his vanishing act in the face of international scrutiny. It was a humiliation with no borders. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage was hitting his stride. Each appearance he made was meticulously designed to exploit Labour's growing vulnerability. He wasn't merely capitalising on Trump's attack, he was expanding on it. This is what global leaders think of Keir Starmer, Farage bellowed at rallies. And if you think Donald Trump is the only one laughing, think again. His audiences erupted. The effect was electric. Reform UK's numbers in the polls began to creep upward. They overtook the Liberal Democrats in several key seats. In red wall constituencies, traditional Labour voters, already sceptical of Starmer's elite image, were openly considering switching allegiance. Farage didn't need to win over the entire country. He just needed to divide the Labour base, and he was doing it with surgical precision. In parallel, back in Parliament, the mutiny within Labour's ranks deepened. More MPs broke ranks. Several refused to appear on scheduled media interviews. Whispers of an emergency meeting among senior Labour officials began to surface, though publicly denied. But insiders confirmed that members of the shadow cabinet were urging Starmer to confront the narrative or step aside. One high-ranking MP even told a journalist, off record, "We cannot afford to go into a general election with a leader who's been branded weak on both sides of the Atlantic." It was a chilling admission of how far the situation had devolved. Adding to the turbulence were renewed questions about Labour's foreign policy alignment. Critics began dissecting Starmer's past statements, drawing attention to moments where he had seemingly prioritised EU integration, transatlantic harmony, and globalism over domestic sovereignty. For Leave-supporting Brits, this was salt in a still raw wound, and the idea that a foreign leader, especially one as influential as Trump, would openly disapprove of Starmer reignited the Brexit versus Remain debate that many believed had been buried.
Suddenly, Farage's anti-globalist rhetoric didn't sound extreme. It sounded prescient. In this climate of political confusion, Starmer's team clung to their original messaging: competence, stability, moderation. But these attributes now seemed disconnected from the national mood. The public didn't want technocratic calm. They wanted strength, resolve. A leader who could go toe-to-toe with giants like Trump, Putin and Xi and not flinch. Instead, all they saw was a man retreating behind talking points and photo ops. Trust in Labour leadership began to nosedive. Internal polling painted a grim picture, showing voters expressing deep concern about Starmer's ability to represent Britain abroad. And then came the ultimate twist. At a packed press conference, Nigel Farage announced that a series of high-profile Labour defectors would be joining Reform UK's advisory board, former aides, campaigners, and even one former MP. The message was clear. Labour's rot wasn't just a media invention. It was real. It was spreading. And Farage was now openly inviting disillusioned members of the Labour family to join his crusade against the political establishment. The move sent shockwaves through Westminster. Reporters swarmed Labour HQ for a response. None came. By now, even international observers began to weigh in. Former diplomats, retired intelligence analysts, and think tanks published opinion pieces, warning that the UK's global image could suffer if Starmer remained a major political player. One US security analyst said bluntly on CNN, "We're not just talking about Trump's opinion here. This incident revealed a fundamental lack of assertiveness in a man who could one day be Prime Minister. That's worrying. In the brutal world of geopolitics, such perceptions matter. And once cast, they're difficult to undo. But perhaps the most damning indicator came not from Westminster, but from the public itself." At town halls across the UK, voters began raising concerns about Starmer's perceived weakness without being prompted. They questioned his silence, they questioned his principles, and crucially, they questioned whether he could lead Britain through turbulent international waters. For many, Trump's words, though brash and politically charged, had simply confirmed what they'd long feared. With Labour in chaos and Starmer wounded, a political vacuum had formed. Farage, never one to miss an opportunity, stepped into it fully. He began outlining Reform UK's foreign policy vision: stronger borders, bilateral trade agreements independent of EU interference, a bold stance against globalist bureaucracy, and a promise to always defend Britain's sovereignty, no matter who sat in the White House. The crowds loved it. And in stark contrast to Starmer's guarded approach, Farage's unapologetic nationalism felt like a rallying cry. In the end, what made Trump's rejection so devastating was not the insult itself, but the truth it exposed. Starmer's image was a carefully curated illusion, crafted for domestic comfort. But the global stage demands more than image. It demands power, presence and pride. Starmer, in that critical moment, had none of these. And now, as the dust settled, Britain faced a deeply uncertain future. Would Labour recover? Would Starmer survive the storm? Or had a single, brutally honest moment from a former US president rewritten the script of British politics entirely?